Chapter 2, Threads of the Past. The next morning, Denise woke with a restless energy she couldn't shake. Her encounter, or near encounter, with Frankie the day before had stirred something in her, and she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. She brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the fields beyond her window. The early sun glinted off the dew, and somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's rooster crowed. Her gaze landed on a photo on the wall, her and Claire on the day they moved into the house. Claire's hair was a wild tangle in the photo, and Denise had one arm slung around her daughter's shoulders, a box in her other hand. They both looked happy and tired and a little unsure of what the future held. Denise smiled softly. That was 3 years ago, and so much had changed since then. She decided she needed to get out of the house. The walls felt too close, her thoughts too loud. Grabbing her keys, she headed for town, but not for errands this time. Today she was chasing memories. The first stop was Grady's Park, a small but charming spot with a gazebo and a creek that cut through the center. Denise had spent countless afternoons here when Claire was younger. She remembered the first time she brought her. Claire was 5 and had just discovered the joy of jumping into puddles. Denise, caught off guard, had ended up just as muddy as her daughter by the end of the day. She chuckled at the memory, but it was bittersweet. Claire was 15, a teenager now, spending the summer with her dad in the city. Denise and Claire were close, but she couldn't help but feel the growing distance between them. Teenagers, she thought, with a wry smile. They were like cats, affectionate on their own terms. A familiar voice broke her reverie.
Morning, Denise. Haven't seen you here in a while.
She turned to see Mrs. Porter, an older woman who walked her corgi, Bandit, through the park every morning. Bandit, of course, had decided Denise's legs were the perfect place to weave his leash.
Morning, Mrs. Porter.
Denise replied, bending down to untangle the leash.
And hello to you, Bandit.
You're looking lovely today.
Mrs. Porter said with a knowing smile.
Almost like you're meeting someone.
Denise laughed.
Oh, stop. I'm just out for a walk. Needed a little fresh air.
Well, if fresh air doesn't do the trick, a slice of Maggie's pie always helps.
Mrs. Porter said with a wink before continuing on her way. Denise shook her head, smiling as she watched them go. The town's charm was in its people, even if they were incorrigible matchmakers. Her next stop was the old bookstore on Main Street. Turn the page, a place she hadn't visited in years. The smell of old paper and cedar shelves enveloped her as she stepped inside. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, letting the titles bring back snippets of her life. She lingered over a worn copy of Little Women, remembering how her mother used to read it to her at bedtime. Her mother's voice had been soothing, her presence steady, even when life wasn't. Denise felt a pang of longing, wishing her mom was still around to offer advice. She could almost hear her saying,
Denise, life's a mess, but it's your mess. Own it.
That thought brought a smile and a tear. As she left the bookstore, she passed a small cafe with outdoor seating. A couple sat at a table, laughing over shared bites of a scone. Denise hesitated for a moment, a flicker of envy touching her heart. Her marriage had started like that, light, fun, full of laughter. But somewhere along the way, it had unraveled, leaving her to pick up the pieces. Still, she wouldn't trade Claire for anything. If her marriage had given her nothing else, it had given her the greatest gift of her life. Her last stop was the community center, a place she used to volunteer when Claire was in elementary school. The kids had loved her, especially her talent for face painting. One year, she painted an entire class as jungle animals for a school play. It had been chaos, but the good kind.
Denise,
A voice came from behind. She turned to see Tom Wilkes, the town's perpetually cheerful handyman.
haven't seen you in ages. You still painting kids into lions and tigers?
Denise laughed.
Not lately. Though I did turn Claire into a zombie last Halloween. I think I scared myself more than her.
Tom chuckled, giving her a thumbs up.
You've still got it. If we ever need a scarecrow painted, I'll call you first.
She waved him off with a laugh, but the interaction left her smiling. Willow Creek was full of people who remembered her, not just as a divorcee or a single mom, but as Denise. It was comforting in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Driving home later, Denise felt lighter, like she'd shed some invisible weight. Life hadn't been perfect, and there were things she'd give anything to change. But as she turned down her street, she realized there were plenty of things she wouldn't trade for the world. Her thoughts wandered back to Frankie. Who had he become in the years since they'd met? And if he was here now, what did it mean? For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope.